He gave everything for love, everything he was, everything he could have been. And when there was nothing left to give, he realized something terrifying. Love wasn't the problem. He was. This is the story of a man who forgot himself in the name of devotion. A man who believed that the more he sacrificed, the more he would be loved. He didn't know that love built on sacrifice alone always ends the same way, in silence. Ethan used to be strong, not just in body, but in presence. He carried himself like a man who knew where he was going, who had a mission and the calm confidence of someone grounded in purpose. People respected that. Women admired it. But admiration can become addiction when a man forgets why he's admired. When he met her, everything changed. It was the kind of connection that makes the world blur for a moment. Her laugh disarmed him. Her voice softened the edges of his day. She was warmth. And for a man who had spent most of his life in control, warmth felt like peace. At first, he was careful. He told himself he wouldn't lose focus. He would keep his routine, his friends, his purpose. But love doesn't ask for permission to expand. It grows quietly until you realize it's taken up all the space where your discipline used to live. He started adjusting small things, skipping workouts, staying up late, pushing back meetings. Just this once, he thought. He didn't know that every time he said, just this once, he was teaching himself to betray his own boundaries. The tragedy of men like Ethan is that they mistake devotion for strength. They think loving deeply is proof of loyalty, but in truth, loyalty without self-respect is submission. And submission slowly kills attraction. She didn't notice at first, but women always feel the shift. That invisible moment when a man's world stops spinning around his purpose and starts spinning around her. The energy changes. The man who once led now follows. The one who used to challenge now agrees. And love, which once burned with passion, begins to dim under the weight of comfort. Ethan didn't see it happening. He thought he was being a good partner, thoughtful, attentive, patient. But what he called love was slowly turning into dependency. Every decision began with a question. Will this make her happy? He stopped asking if it would make him proud. The mirror began to shift. The reflection that once showed confidence now showed uncertainty. He started second-guessing himself, not just in love, but in life. Even small things felt heavy. Choosing a shirt, responding to a text, expressing an opinion. He filtered everything through her approval. He told himself he was being kind. But kindness without boundaries is weakness, and weakness dressed as virtue is still weakness. The first time she pulled away, he felt it instantly. A text unanswered, a call delayed, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He panicked. Not because he was losing her, but because she was the only thing left holding him together. When a man builds his identity on someone else's affection, distance feels like death. He began to overcompensate. He sent more messages, planned more dates, gave more compliments. Every action screamed the same thing. Please see me again. But attention can't be begged for. It can only be inspired. And inspiration dies when certainty fades. The truth about love is that it feeds on polarity, the balance between strength and softness. When a man becomes too soft, love loses its structure. She no longer feels safe in his presence, not because he's cruel, but because he's unanchored. He didn't notice how much she changed. Her words grew shorter, her tone distant, her laughter hollow. But the silence, that was the loudest part. The silence between messages, between calls, between hearts. He blamed himself, of course. That's what men like Ethan do. They assume if they just work harder, love will return. But love doesn't respond to effort. It responds to energy. And his energy was no longer masculine. It was desperate. He didn't lose her in one moment. He lost her slowly, in every small act of self-betrayal, every time he said yes when he meant no, every time he stayed quiet to avoid conflict, every time he ignored his own discomfort just to keep her comfortable. She started to withdraw, not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. Women are not drawn to the man who worships them. They're drawn to the man who reminds them of strength. And Ethan no longer represented strength. He represented safety, and safety, without tension, is boredom. Still, he held on. He waited for the messages that never came. He stared at his phone, scrolling through old photos, searching for proof that what they had was real. He remembered the way she used to look at him before he became predictable, before he started living for her instead of for himself. Men like Ethan don't fall in love, they surrender to it. And surrender without purpose always ends in resentment. He didn't know it then, but the version of himself that she once admired was already gone. And the man that replaced him was one she couldn't love, because even he didn't love himself anymore. He started waking up later, skipping routines, avoiding mirrors. The man who once faced every challenge head-on now avoided his own reflection. Because every time he looked, he saw the same thing, a man who gave everything for love and forgot who he was in the process. And maybe that's the cruel beauty of love. It doesn't just show us who we care for, it shows us what we lack. Ethan thought he lost her, but the truth was far worse. He lost his center, his direction, his self. He thought love would save him, but love doesn't save a man who's already abandoned himself. It only exposes the emptiness he's been hiding. He didn't remember when the silence began. One day the laughter felt thinner, the air heavier, the texts colder. The same home that once carried warmth now echoed like a hotel room, temporary, unfamiliar, filled with ghosts of what was. He told himself it was just a phase, that every relationship goes through storms. But deep down he knew. It wasn't a storm. It was erosion, slow, silent, inevitable. He scrolled through their photos at midnight, tracing her smile with his eyes, as if staring long enough could bring her back. He replayed every conversation, searching for the mistake he must have made. Was he too much? Too little? Too late? He started apologizing for things that weren't his fault. He started shrinking himself to fit into her fading affection. And every time he did, she respected him less. Because love cannot live where respect has died. He stopped leading, stopped deciding. He waited for cues, like a student waiting for permission from a teacher who had already moved on. She said she needed space, and he gave her everything. Space, silence, distance, hoping that absence would somehow bring her closer. He didn't know that giving space to a woman who's already gone is just preparing the room for someone else. Days turned into weeks. He kept himself busy to avoid the ache, but even the quiet moments betrayed him. At night, he could hear his own thoughts whispering, "She doesn't miss you. She misses who you used to be." That sentence cut deeper than any breakup ever could, because it was true. She didn't miss the man who now begged for attention. She missed the man who didn't need it. He began losing interest in the world. Work felt meaningless. Friends became noise. He'd sit in his car for hours, engine off, just staring at the steering wheel. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was numbness. And numbness is worse than pain. Pain reminds you you're alive. Numbness convinces you you're not worth feeling anything at all. He had no appetite. He stopped sleeping. His body was present, but his soul was out wandering somewhere between regret and disbelief. He blamed himself for not being enough, when the truth was, he'd been too much of something else. Too available, too forgiving, too safe. Men are told that love is selflessness. But when selflessness becomes self-erasure, love turns to poison. He didn't realize that the version of him she once adored was the version that had boundaries. The one who could walk away, the one who could say no. Now, every yes felt like a confession that he no longer belonged to himself. He tried to talk to her again, but the warmth was gone. Her words polite, her eyes distant. She wasn't cruel, she was indifferent. And indifference is love's funeral. She said, "You've changed." And he had. Not because love had transformed him, but because fear had hollowed him out. He became a mirror of her moods, a shadow of his own strength. He smiled when he didn't want to. He agreed when he should have stood firm. He stayed when his soul begged him to leave. That night, he stood in front of the mirror, staring at the man looking back. The same face, the same eyes, but no fire. He whispered, "What happened to you?" The reflection had no answer. He felt anger rising, not at her, but at himself. For every time he silenced his instincts, for every boundary he erased in the name of love, for every time he thought peace meant avoiding truth. And in that anger, something flickered. Awareness. The faintest spark of clarity. He realized he hadn't lost a woman. He'd lost himself, trying to keep one. And maybe that was the lesson love had come to teach him, that no one can complete you if you've already abandoned your core. He sat down, took a deep breath, and let silence fill the room. It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. He didn't feel healed, he felt real. And reality, though painful, was better than illusion. Because pain faced is wisdom gained. And in that wisdom, the man inside him began to wake. He thought the worst part was losing her, but it wasn't. The worst part was waking up and realizing the version of himself that could have walked away no longer existed. He stopped waiting for messages that would never come, stopped checking the screen for proof that she cared. For the first time in months, he sat in silence and let the truth breathe. He didn't need her to tell him it was over. He felt it, quiet, complete, like the end of a season that never comes back. But in that stillness, he discovered something new. Emptiness isn't a curse. It's a mirror. And in that mirror, he saw not the victim, not the lover, but the man who had chosen comfort over purpose. He began to understand that she hadn't broken him. She had revealed him. All those years of control, of structure, of chasing goals, none of it mattered when he forgot who he was doing it for. He was strong in routine, but weak in identity. He had built his life on discipline, but not on direction. He looked back at the moment he met her and realized something he couldn't see before. He hadn't fallen in love with her. He had fallen in love with the version of himself that appeared when she looked at him. She was the mirror reflecting the man he wanted to be. When she stopped reflecting that light, he thought he lost her. But what he really lost was the illusion. Men are taught to lead others before they learn to lead themselves, to protect, to provide, to endure. But no one tells them that if you protect others while neglecting your own soul, your strength turns into servitude. He replayed every mistake, not to punish himself, but to understand. He saw that every yes he had given her was a no to himself. And that's when it hit him. She was never the center of his story. He was supposed to be. He had spent years living like a side character in his own life. And when the main plot returned, he didn't recognize the man who was meant to star in it. He began to study silence. In that silence, he heard things he'd forgotten. The sound of his own breathing, the pulse of his thoughts, the faint whisper of self-respect returning. He didn't rush to heal. Healing isn't a race, it's a ritual. He let the pain linger long enough to understand it. He didn't ask, "Why me?" anymore. He asked, "What is this trying to teach me?" And the lesson was simple. You can't lead anyone from a place of emptiness. You can't give what you haven't earned. And you can't be loved until you love the man in the mirror first. He stood up one morning and decided to rebuild, not for her, not to prove anything, but because he owed it to the man he left behind. He cleaned his apartment, one piece at a time. He put his phone away. He walked outside and felt the cold air bite his skin. It hurt, but it was real. And for the first time, real was enough. He went back to the gym. The first lift felt heavy, not because of the weight, but because it carried months of shame. But with every repetition, the shame started to bleed out. The body remembers what the mind forgets: discipline. He didn't train for a physique. He trained for presence. He began journaling, not to complain, but to confess. Every sentence started the same way. I forgot who I was. I forgot why I started. I forgot that love without self-respect is a slow suicide. By the end of the first week, the pages began to change. I remember what peace feels like. I remember that solitude isn't loneliness. It's clarity. He noticed his thoughts becoming calmer, his breathing slower. The same world that once felt hostile now looked like an open field. Nothing had changed outside. Everything had changed inside. Because once a man stops chasing what's gone, he starts attracting what aligns. He stopped seeing her as the villain. He stopped seeing himself as the victim. Both were simply teachers in disguise. She taught him to love deeply, and he taught himself to never love blindly again. That was the turning point. Pain turned into perspective, and perspective turned into power. He looked in the mirror again. Same face, same eyes. But this time, he saw awareness behind them. The same mirror that once showed weakness now reflected strength. The same silence that once felt empty now sounded peaceful. And for the first time, he smiled. Not because he was healed, but because he was honest. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he was finally walking it with himself. Every man must meet this moment once in his life. The collapse, the silence, the mirror. The weak avoid it. The strong face it. And the awakened become it. Because the mirror doesn't lie. It only shows the truth that love tried to hide. He didn't wake up one day healed. There was no moment of sudden clarity, no divine voice whispering the path back to himself. Healing doesn't arrive with a sunrise, it arrives with discipline. And discipline is never loud. It's quiet, repetitive, sacred. Ethan began again. Not dramatically. There were no grand declarations, no new life speeches, just small choices. He made his bed. He went for a walk. He ate a real meal. He read 2 pages of a book instead of scrolling through her memory on his phone. Small victories, invisible to everyone but him. The world still felt heavy, but every action carried a message. I'm not done yet. He trained again. The first day, his body resisted. The second, his mind complained. The third, something shifted. He remembered who he was when he was tired but still kept going. That man had always been there. He'd just buried him under comfort. Comfort is the enemy of greatness. It whispers, rest, you deserve it. Even when what you deserve is momentum. And Ethan had rested long enough. He stopped chasing the feeling of love and started chasing self-respect. Because love is emotional currency. Respect is internal wealth. And wealth that doesn't depend on others can never be taken away. He began to set boundaries again, not as walls, but as fences with gates. Boundaries keep peace in, not people out. He said no more often, not out of bitterness, but clarity. Because the man who can't say no has no direction. He started to rebuild his mind like an architect rebuilding a fallen city, brick by brick, habit by habit, day by day. No shortcuts, no miracles, just effort. He learned something vital in that process. He didn't need to find himself. He was never lost. He was simply distracted by who he thought he needed to be for others. When the noise faded, what remained was pure discipline, strength, stillness. There were days he still missed her. He didn't lie about it. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without collapsing. He could think of her name now without bitterness, without the ache of what if. Because sometimes love's purpose is not to stay. It's to awaken. He stopped comparing himself to other men. Comparison is a thief. It steals gratitude, kills focus, poisons growth. Instead, he began to compete with yesterday's version of himself. He asked, "What did I build today that didn't exist before?" Even a single thought, a single rep, a single step counted. He noticed the world responding differently. People respected him again, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't need to say. Presence doesn't shout, it vibrates. He no longer filled silence with explanations. He let stillness speak for him. He saw women look at him again. Not because he sought their gaze, but because his attention had value now. A man with direction doesn't chase. He attracts. Not by charm, but by certainty. He wasn't bitter about love anymore. He understood its place. Love is not the goal. It's a companion to the goal. When purpose leads, love follows. When love leads, both get lost. He began to mentor a younger coworker, not to feel wise, but to share what pain had taught him. Never trade your mission for attention. Attention fades. Purpose doesn't. Every night, before bed, he stood in front of the mirror again. The same mirror that once mocked him now saluted him. He looked into his own eyes and said, "You're not there yet, but you're moving again." And that was enough. He learned that masculinity isn't control, it's direction. It's standing firm when the world shakes, choosing principle over pleasure, purpose over validation. True masculinity isn't about dominance, it's about mastery. And mastery begins with the man in the mirror. He didn't need to prove anything anymore, not to her, not to the world, not even to himself. He only needed to keep showing up. Because that's how men rebuild, one honest step at a time. And on one quiet morning, months later, he walked past a cafe they used to visit. He saw her sitting there with someone else. She laughed the same laugh, tilted her head the same way. But something in him was different. There was no ache, just gratitude. He smiled softly, not for her, but for himself, because she hadn't taken anything from him. She had given him the opportunity to reclaim everything he'd forgotten. The reflection was complete. He didn't need closure. He had clarity. He kept walking, not away from her, but toward himself. And this time, he didn't look back. He didn't mark the day it happened, because real transformation never announces itself. There's no lightning strike, no applause, no camera fade, just a quiet morning when the air feels lighter and the war inside finally ends. He walked past the mirror again, the same mirror that once condemned him. But this time, it didn't judge. It listened. He stared at his reflection and saw both the boy and the man coexisting. The boy who once loved blindly. The man who now loved consciously. They didn't hate each other anymore. They understood each other. He realized something simple, almost embarrassingly simple. She was never the story. She was the catalyst. The story was always him. His rise, his fall, his awakening. Love hadn't destroyed him. It had refined him. Fire doesn't ask permission to burn. It consumes what's weak so that what's strong can remain. And the parts of him that survived were the ones worth keeping. He understood now what men rarely say out loud. That heartbreak is initiation. That pain is not punishment. it's purification. That solitude isn't emptiness. It's the forge where identity is reforged. He didn't need validation anymore. He didn't need someone to tell him he mattered. He knew. Because he finally respected the one person he'd ignored for years, himself. When he walked into rooms now, he didn't need to be noticed. He carried silence like armor. And silence is power, the kind that speaks before you do. He no longer chased happiness. He chased alignment between what he thought, what he said, and what he did. That's what peace really is. Internal alignment. A man who lives in harmony with his values is untouchable. He had no anger left for her, no regret, no longing, only gratitude. Because every scar she left was now a lesson written into his soul. He wore those lessons not as wounds, but as wisdom. He learned that life isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being rebuilt, over and over again, stronger, calmer, wiser each time. He remembered the nights he begged for her to come back. Now he smiled at the thought, not out of arrogance, but understanding. He didn't want her anymore. He wanted the version of himself who thought love would fix him. But that version no longer existed. He had outgrown the illusion. He had met reality, and reality, though harsh, was honest. Every man eventually meets this mirror. Some run from it. Some hide behind distractions, alcohol, noise, women, success. But the brave ones stand and look. They face the truth staring back and whisper, "Not again." Those words change everything. Because the man who can confront himself no longer fears losing anything else. He walked outside. The same world that once felt heavy now felt alive. He heard the city differently. The rhythm of footsteps, the pulse of the wind, the breathing of life itself. He wasn't chasing meaning anymore. He was creating it, with every step, every breath, every decision. And as he stood there, sunlight on his face, he understood the simplest truth of all. Love isn't meant to save you. It's meant to reveal what still needs saving. He gave everything for love, and in losing everything, he found himself. This is not motivation. This is reflection.